Squirrels! So hello, and welcome to another Legends of Runeterra video. My name is Chris, and today we're going to talk about a couple things. We're going to go way back in time to sort of look at some of the devs' early aspirations for this game and reasons for some of their decisions in this game and what they were trying to do. And obviously, using our hindsight minds, we can go back and review them. Now, this is quite interesting because if you keep up with, particularly if you go onto the Runeterra subreddit every so often and just browse it, you might see people bring up some things that if you join the game later on, you might not, sort of realize what's going on. Because we're here in patch 0.9. If you want to know what was going on in patch 0.9, Lux was getting a buff, Yasuo was getting a buff, Back to Back was getting nerfed. This is probably a card that you've never seen, but this used to cost 5 mana. Who knew? Arena Battlecaster was getting, Deny got nerfed. This one big. Experimenta, this was a very big nerf. So, that's what was going on at this point in the game. But what we're going to talk about instead is this. Because this is what I'm interested in. Because this is what the devs set out to do in terms of balance. So when we look at balance in LoR and consider changes, we have some high-level aspirational targets we use to guide long-term efforts. So you might have seen some people bring up some of these things. Every champion should have a deck where their best fit and their dream can be realized. Non-champion cards should have at least one deck where they're a good option. Regions should have at least one competitively viable deck. The meta should support the widest possible array of competitively viable decks. Now, if we go through these and kind of rate them on how well they did with them, every champion have a deck where their best fit and their dream can be realized. There are some, of course, significant outliers like Katarina and Aphelios now, you could say, and maybe some others like Malphite or whatever. And so there definitely are some that they probably haven't done enough to try and make this really a possibility. For the most part, though, I think most champions, even if they're not that great, like Maokai, for instance, still fits within deep, even though you might consider Maokai to not be that good. He still fits within deep. So, I would call this like they've done okay with it. Non-champion cards should have at least one deck where they're a good option. Obviously, with power creep coming into the game, this just isn't really a possibility anymore, I would say. Like, this just isn't gonna be the case now that the card pool is as big as it is. And so, this one you could probably say that they didn't do, but there's probably just too many cards at this point to really do at this point. Regions should have at least one competitively viable deck. This one they've done okay on, I think, overall. There's always seems to be like one region that kind of misses out. But for the most part, I do feel like the regional balance in the game has been okay to where at least they have one viable deck. I would say that they've done okay with this. The meta should support the wildest array of competitively viable decks. I mean, outside of like a couple metas, like Aurelia or maybe Tia Fizz or Lee Sin at 4 mana, generally speaking, we've had, a clear, there's decks that can compete with a bunch of different things. There has been some tier 0 decks in this game, but I would say it's not that often overall, I would say. But maybe that's just me. Maybe you would disagree. So I think they've done, again, okay on that. But I'm also going to talk about release schedules, because it's kind of interesting. If you come down here, this was made before they had made the decision to change the release schedule, which is really quite interesting, because this is what they initially planned for, and it's quite interesting to see it and sort of read through it. So, new set of cards released. First balance patch, mostly medium-sized number changes based on early sense of outliers. Second balance patch, significant updates to underutilized cards. And the main patch, where you can expect any major champion updates. Third balance patch, limited number of changes to stabilize any meta issues. And then next set of cards released. Now, that obviously was what they were going for, where you have set release, 3 months, each month has a balance patch, big set release. Obviously, they changed that after Rising Tides, and the Targon expansion was the first one where they did the 3 things, and we'll go into that a bit as well in the post where they announced that. But I thought that it was interesting to just sort of show you what was going on. And maybe it's me looking back wrongly. Maybe this is me being a bit rose-tinted glasses about the past, of having nostalgia for this game. But if I'm being honest with you, the time from Rising Tides of the Mountain, I think was the best time to be playing this game. I think in between there, that was the peak of this game for a lot of different reasons. One, these balance patches, they did this. They stuck to this in between. They had 3 pretty significant balance patches in between Rising Tides and Call of the Mountain. And it worked. You know, those bounce patches made a significant number of changes. And by the third one in particular, from that third bounce patch to the release of Call of the Mountain, that was like the best meta ever. You know, I know some people have been like, you know, saying the one recently after the big patch, not this most recent patch, but the one before was really good. And it was, don't get me wrong. But to me, the best one was that this third bounce patch of Rising Tides was really the best time to be playing the game, I think. And these first and second bounce patches also made big differences in terms of what was going on in the meta as well. Maybe I'm looking back with rose tinting, because there was like burn aggro there everyone was complaining about for a while, and there was plenty of decks that were causing problems as well that people were complaining about. So, you know, maybe I'm looking back a bit in the wrong way. But overall, I thought that this was, you know, this was a great time to be playing the game. And it's kind of interesting that they went away from this. And we can go now to the post where they talk about why they did that. So here is that post. It's building a better card game expansions and sets. You can still find it on the LoR news page if you want to, you know, go back and read it all. But obviously we know what happened. So here's why they kind of explain it. So one of the simplest and exciting ways to shake up the meta is just add more cards more frequently, but that comes with a cascade of additional design decisions and trade-offs. Call of the Mountain was our first opportunity to explore how a full set could fit into different expansions and how that structure might work for future sets. The core idea was to create more frequent points of strategy discovery and meta disruption. Instead of one big launch party that slowly fizzled out, what if we had multiple expansions, a month of energizing twists and turns? Makes sense, right? Like, normally what happens in card games is you get a big expansion and everyone plays and everyone's like, oh, well, this new stuff's really cool. Oh, let's go play it. And, you know, after about a month, things kind of fizzle out. You know, things have kind of been solved. Things have kind of, you know, then you're just kind of, you know, you basically get like first month, everyone's hyped. Everyone's playing the new things. Second month, the game kind of dies out. Third month, everyone's just waiting for spoilers, and it's spoiler season for the next new thing to enjoy that next month. So I can understand why they wanted to avoid that kind of general thing of what was going on in a lot of other card games where that structure, you know, is kind of in place. So I can understand why they sort of thought that they should try and avoid that if possible. Obviously, we can look back now and kind of, you know, look back though and go, this had some major problems in terms of the smaller releases that they made just weren't impactful enough. They weren't big enough. They weren't impactful enough. And, you know, we can go back and sort of look at them and point at them and go, what? This was a bad idea. You know, for instance, the first mini expansion, the first smaller of the expansions that they did in this kind of style was Tahm Kench, Soraka, and Shyvana. Now, Tahm Kench and Soraka obviously go together and they were pretty good. You know, and they worked together well as a pair, but not really with anything else. And Shyvana, particularly at that time, just wasn't good. So, we basically got one deck out of that expansion. Not great. Next one was what? Victor, Riven, and Zoe. So Victor and Riven came out pretty weak. They had to, you know, they've both gotten buffed, and even then, you know, still aren't like amazing or whatever. Riven's okay, but you know, still not amazing. Zoe obviously was great. And Zoe was sort of, I think, the power level that those champions, the power level and flexibility that those champions needed to all kind of be to make it a worthwhile expansion. But basically from that expansion, we got one champion. Then we can go to the Shurima ones as well, and you get what, like Aurelia, Malphite, and Zilean, was it? And obviously Zilean came out on his own and just wasn't good, and even when Echo came out, he wasn't good. But you know, Aurelia obviously dominated the game and was, you know, completely broken, tier 0, and Malphite was horrendous. So again, we kind of got one thing that expansion, really, you could argue, was just detrimental to the game. That's how bad that expansion was. But it was detrimental to the game. Then the next one came out with Lurk again. We had one deck where they don't really synergize with that much else. And Echo to fulfill the Zilean thing, and Echo obviously was really bad. And so again, we basically got one deck out of that expansion. So not great. You know, when we look at the history of those mini expansions, they really haven't been great. And we're kind of coming up to the point where, you know, we're getting the first Bandle City mini expansion as well now. And this one, I have more hope for a couple of reasons. One, I think, and this isn't confirmed, but I think that they should be 4 champions rather than 3. If you kind of do the maths of kind of like working out how many champions have come out in each expansion, you know, there's two more basically, from Targon. I think it was 13 or 15. I can't remember. I think it was like 13 for Targon, 15 for Shurima, and then you would think that would follow on. I think it's meant to be 17 for Bandle C, but that's just off the top of my head. And I think we got 9, and so that should leave 8, but that's not confirmed. That's just sort of my own sort of working back from what happened before and hoping that that is the case. Because if it is 4 in each of them, obviously that gives you one more champion to potentially be good. And obviously it means that if you do 2 pairs, that is at least 2 decks. And of course, the Bandle City champions will be dual region, which again gives them sort of more flexibility in terms of the options that they can play with. So, I am hopeful that there will be, more options for these mini expansions this time than there have been in the past. But with that said, I think it's kind of interesting that, if you go back and sort of look at from Rising Tides to Call of the Mountain, almost completely forgot what I was talking about then. That time was really quite fun to play, even though it stuck to kind of that old school card game release cycle. But adding in those balance patches as well, those big balance patches every month, the game still felt very fresh to play. So, we could maybe look back and sort of go, was it a mistake? What should we have stuck with the original thing? Should we have stuck with what we initially, just the basic simple ideas of having balance patches and the normal release schedule? Well, tomorrow I'm kind of going to go into that a bit more and talk about some of the problems and how I would go about fixing some of the problems with Legends of Runeterra, and talk about what I think, and why I think they should be really. This was more of the why I think they could look at this again. Why I think maybe, particularly now that all the regions have come out, it would be a good time to kind of look at this again and think, is it working? And, tomorrow we're going to talk about what things I would specifically kind of change to try and make this game as good as it could be and as fresh as it could be. Because what if you notice, the thing that they keep mentioning is keeping the game fresh. They wanted to, they don't want things to slowly fizzle out. And yet, right now, I'm sure many of you will agree, we're kind of at a point where the game has somewhat fizzled out. And so, we're going to talk about that tomorrow and talk about how we could maybe fix that. So with that said, thank you so much for watching and have a really nice day.